Let's step back a little bit for our viewers who might not know. You're actually the king of stutter edits. You have the Guinness World Record, right?
Yeah, that's right.
6,178 vocal edits in one.
Wow, you memorized
song.
it. I'm impressed.
Well, it's an important figure for me, right?
Right on. Yeah, that's right.
So tell us what a stutter edit is.
A stutter edit. So, and just to step back for a second, for me, where this came from me is, you have to imagine me as a 12-year-old tape op at Omega Studios in Rockville, Maryland, and I was interested. It's funny because the Beatles came up before we were on camera here. You know, I grew up listening to things like this, and also to some of the experimental, you know, early 20th century electronic music. You know, your John Cage, Ian Xenakis, these guys, musique concrète, people that were playing with tape. You know, and I was very interested in manipulating recordings to a stereo master. You know, and more specific than that, rhythmically. So I used to sit with a grease pencil and a razor blade and a half-inch tape machine when I was 12 years old, and I would figure out, okay, this track is 130 beats per minute. That means a bar is 2.5 feet of tape at 15 IPS. And if I subdivide that bar into 4 pieces, then those are the quarter notes. And if I subdivide it into 8 pieces, those are the eighth notes. I used to literally sit there with a grease pencil, and I used to take bars of audio and move the slices around. This is prior to any digital audio workstation, period. This is before the Fairlight or the Synclavier or any of it. It warranted further study because it was really compelling to hear music recontextualized rhythmically in this fashion. And so as sampling technology came to be, I started doing these things in a sampler. And then again, eventually, my interest in mathematics and computers all sort of dovetailed into wanting to be able to do this not by hand, and also too thinking, you know, sort of future-proofing it as a concept, thinking, well, what happens when we move from pitch or from rhythm into pitch? You know, because pitch just being a higher repetition of rhythm, you know, at 20 hertz, you know, rhythmic figure becomes expressed as pitch. So, so I was interested in what happens when we move from a rhythmic figure into pitch, or vice versa, and what does that sound like? And so I started building things and prototyping things to do some of these things. Also, you know, when you're sitting there physically cutting up tape, it's not like, you know, I was able to do 256th note repetitions or 1024th notes. Much less was I able to change the spacing between the notes. But it's something that I thought of probably 20 years ago, and that I wanted to be able to do. And as I began to prototype these things in, you know, software, that was possible. And so I started making these figures that accelerando and decelerando within this microrhythmic gesture, and they're just still so cool and modernist sounding, you know, and they're things that are you could only do now. And so I wanted to find a way to make those things available to people that, you know, might not even understand what they were, but knew by putting their finger on a keyboard that it sounds cool. So, and so for live performance, I wanted to design something that was able to manipulate multiple timelines of audio manipulation, DSP, with a single key down. It's funny because I've heard, one of the things that I've heard people say about Stutter is, oh, but so you can't automate all the different parameters. And my response to that was like, I don't really think you understand what is happening when you press a single key down. It's automating all the parameters. And you can interrupt them using the mod wheel. You can interrupt all the timelines and then move through all the timelines, you know, rhythmically. So it's just so exciting to hear what people are doing with this, aside from, you know, me, because I have a very specific way that I've used it, and I've used it for years. And then, you know, to turn on the radio and to hear a Britney Spears track or a Rihanna track, like S&M, I just heard the new Rihanna track. It's literally all over it.
That's great.
And it's just so exciting to hear vocalists, instrumentalists, you know, DJs, electronic musicians using it in ways that I never imagined, you know. It's also given me a lot more ideas, too, for subsequent versions of it. But extraordinarily exciting.
Right, right. So you've spent, you're intensely, very deeply into technology, obviously, as we're talking about here, and you also have the pure musical side, the composing, and you do film scores and game scores and your own records, and if you could call them records anymore.
Yeah,
and
we do. I do.
live,
Yeah.
live performances.
Yeah.
How do you balance that technology and using all of that effectively with the musical side of it? Because one of the hallmarks of your music is that it's very musical. You have a great musicality to all your performances. I think that's one of the things that really separates what you do.
Thank you.
So
for saying
how do
that.
you achieve that with the balance?
You know, technology to me, if it is the impetus for composition, that's an inherently flawed process. Like if you're starting there and trying to reverse engineer something from a compositional perspective that's meaningful, you're never gonna, that's not a finish line you're ever gonna cross. That's from my own personal experience. I'm sure that other people have different experiences with that.
Right.
But for me, it comes from this incredible want and drive to make a piece of music that reaches another person's ears that has meaning to them. And so technology is an extension of the compositional process, not the compositional process itself for me. So, you know, something like Stutter Edit and this idea of being able to spline from 1,000 to 24th notes down to 8th note triplets over a dotted quarter note or whatever exponentially, you know, that is something that I want to be able to do in a composition that already has, you know, a meaningful, you know, melodic motif and, you know, varying, you know, whatever ostinato patterns and a lyric that I sat and slaved away at, you know, that has meaning.
Right.
So those kind of things are more like the ear candy thing, you know what I mean, than the actual composition itself. So,
Right.
You know, I'm always thinking of these kind of interesting sort of esoteric technology-based ideas that sort of augment either the compositional process, the production process, and make it more interesting and a richer experience, you know? But I don't think that those are the things that you should hang a composition on, at least from my own personal, you know, vantage point.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
So you have to start with something that has meaning and, you know.
So when you start, do you have a fairly realized vision of what the final will be, or do you start with a chord progression and the melody and then the rest of it comes? How do you compose?
It's both ways. Actually, it's one of two of the ways that you said. It either starts, you know, something, rolling around something in my head for a couple weeks, sit down, get to a guitar, get to a piano, you know, and a piece of paper and a pencil and write it out.
Right.
Or it's something that, you know, get together with other musicians and we'll sit and write something, you know, in a very traditional kind of Nashville sense, like write a song, you know? And then from that point, then it's like, you know, from a production level, the world is your oyster. It's like you can take that a million different ways. We were talking over breakfast. There's a song on These Hopeful Machines, my last album, called Every Other Way that I wrote with Jess. And that song, you listen to it and it's got this crazy, you know, like 2-minute edit section at the end, and it's got all of these really strange rhythmic figures in it that people, you know, are like, well, that's sort of like this, but sort of like, you can't really come up with a name for it. But you take all of that out of it, that makes it sonically interesting, and it's a bluegrass song.
Wow.
At the root of it.
Sure.
A straight bluegrass song. Harmonically, it's got this, you know, pentatonic major thing to it. The contrapuntal vocal lines, everything about it is a bluegrass song. It's intentional too. I love bluegrass. It's like one of you know, our greatest American idioms of music. So you know, during that time, it's listening to a lot of bluegrass, and I sat with Jess. We sat on my porch with an acoustic guitar and we wrote the song. And then I did something, you know, very you know, interesting with it sonically, you know. But for me, the compositional process has to start with a song, you know. And the things that I'm most proud of that I've written are all surrounded by the song, you know.
Right.
So.
Right. Is that the same approach when you're doing a remix? You've done remixes for everyone from Gypsy Kings to Sarah McLachlan to all kinds of people.
Yeah.
Is that the same approach you take? Is it different when you're working with a different style of artist that you're remixing, or how does that all work?
That's it. That is a different thing, and it can be really fun in a different way. So, you know, I enjoy doing remixes. I haven't done them for a long time, and I just recently did a couple of them. And it's because people would come to me with something that would sort of sound like something I would do and say, can you make this more like you, you know?
Right.
And like, I'm not really adding anything to this, you know? So it has to be something that's way far, you know, a large degree of polarity away from something that I would do, and that's more compelling to me. Like, what can I bring to this that's different and interesting, but honors the original composition, you know? So for me, it's like getting to take something and stand it on its head a little bit. That's really compelling, that, you know, gets me out of bed creatively, so to speak.
Right,
you know?
right.
So
now the most recent album from you features remixes of your songs. Is that correct?
yeah, it does. Yeah, we did a so when I did These Hopeful Machines, during that time, I actually took the songs and I gave them to a lot of my friends that are, you know, electronic music artists, that are bands, that are DJs, that are singers. And I said, what would you do with this song? And they would come back to me and say, you know, wow, well, I would do this, you know?
Right.
And so, you know, I have everything from my friend Amelia June singing a song on the album, Forget Me, in French, as this beautiful, it's like a lullaby in French, to, you know, Hammock doing a version of Every Other Way, you know, this shoegaze kind of Nashville shoegaze band, to, you know, Armin van Buuren and, you know, Ferry Corsten and guys like that doing these thundering remixes of songs. So when all said and done, we ended up with over 7 hours of music.
Wow.
And so, you know, you can't really put that on a CD. So we made a beautiful box that's coming out this summer.
Right.
It's really, really special.
I can't wait to check that out.
Yeah, with all of the music on it.
That had to be so cool to hear what other artists did with your compositions.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
It really was. I mean, just, and people whose work I admire too.
Right.
You know, to get to hear them, you know, exactly what you said, like what they would do with it, you know?
Yeah.
It was really, really cool.
All right, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks,
Yeah,
man.
We're so glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks.
You're actually
Excited
leaving
to be here.
you're leaving the workshop to go do. I'm sorry, you're leaving this video to go do your workshop. And
Yep,
we're excited to see what you do with Stutter Edit. And
Cool, man. I
and then
can't
you're
wait.
performing later today.
Yes,
also,
I am.
aren't you? Giving a little concert.
Yeah.
So, very cool.
Can't wait.
Very cool. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, you
It's
got
great
it,
to
man.
see you.
Absolutely. You too, man. Right on.
I'm Mitch Gallagher. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute.